Hello, my name is Ron Williams, minister for the Lincoln Church of Christ here in Huntsville, Alabama. And this morning I'd like to talk to you about something that is universal. You know, they say that there are two things that everyone has to deal with, death and taxes. Well, today we want to talk about something else, and it's called grief. We all deal with grief. It is a universal emotion. It does not matter whether we want to avoid it, as it does not matter if we'd like to just act like it can't be a part of our lives, because grief is universal. 100% of people deal with grief in one way or the other. Either we will grieve and deal with the loss of things or people significant and important to us, or they will grieve over our loss. You're probably thinking, I don't want to think about grief. I don't want to talk about grief. I don't even want to listen to someone talk about the idea of grief. And it may be because you're dealing with realities in your life that are less than positive. You're dealing with issues of life that trouble you. Perhaps you feel the way this group of individuals felt. The Holland, Michigan Theos chapter surveyed their members about how they were feeling, and they came up with this phrase or this section of grief issues entitled Just Walk With Me. Listen to what they say. Perhaps you can relate. I have a problem. I want to tell you about it. No, I really don't. I'd rather keep it to myself, handle it alone. I do think it would be good for me to share it with you, though I don't want to because of what you'll say or how you'll act. I'm afraid you might feel sorry for me in a way that makes me feel pathetic, like I'm some poor thing. I'm afraid you're trying to cheer me up. That you'll give me words or text or prayers or platitudes that tell me in a subtle way to stop feeling bad. Now, if you do that, I'll feel worse, but I'll probably hide it behind my obedient, cheerful smile. I'll feel you don't understand. I'll feel you're making light of my problem as if it can be brushed away with some brief words of cheer. I'm afraid you might give me an answer. That this problem that I've been wrestling with for some time now and about which I have thought endless thoughts can be belittled. You can answer in a half minute what I've been struggling with for weeks? Come on. I'm afraid. You might just ignore my problem. Talk quickly about other things. Tell me your own problems. Look away or go away. I'm afraid you might see me stronger than I really am. That I don't need you to listen or to care. Now, it's true that I can get alone, but I shouldn't have to. What I'd really like, if you would just walk with me. Listen as I begin in some blundering, clumsy way to break through my fearfulness of being exposed as weak and needy. Hold my hand. Pull me gently as I falter and begin to draw back. Say a word, make a motion or a sound that says, I am with you. If you've been where I am, tell me how you feel in a way that I can know that you're trying to walk with me, not change me. But again, I say, I'm afraid that you'll think that I'm too weak to deserve respect and responsibility. I'm afraid you'll explain what's happening to me with labels and interpretations. I'm afraid you'll just ask me, well, what you going to do about it? Please just walk with me. All those other things seem so much brighter and sharper and smarter and expert. But what really takes love is to just walk with me. I'm sure what I want is people to have a shepherd as their model. People who, in their own way, bring others an experience of the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. Yes, even when I walk through the valley, you are with me, walking with me. 2020 has been some kind of year. And even though we're beyond that, we're still dealing with a pandemic. But it's been a year, 2020 was a year that I think the word that could be described would be totally abnormal. Because every kind of loss that we can imagine pretty much happened in 2020. Particularly from March on to the end of the year, and even now to this point in time. Think about some of the losses that you may have experienced. Maybe you didn't even think about them this year, this past year. The loss of normalcy, the loss of routine. Perhaps you lost your health for a period of time. The loss that comes from loneliness, isolation, having to be quarantined, social distancing. The loss from family. Likely you dealt with family as we dealt with family that had COVID, and we had to stay away from them for a period of time and pray and be concerned about their health. Maybe they got better. Sadly, maybe they died. The loss of income. Millions of Americans were sent home. And still today, so many do not have the jobs that they once had or the quality jobs that they can still do. The loss of change in regard to being having to deal with every kind of thing that most folks never even think about. Where am I going to find toilet tissue or paper towel? How am I going to get my groceries if I can't go to the grocery store? Who's going to pick up my prescriptions? Do I still go to the doctor for visits? What if I have to go to the hospital for some procedure? The loss of relationships at church. Likely most of us had to make changes in our worship, at least in coming together to worship God as we would like to have done. And even if we did come, we had to practice social distancing, and we're not able to hug someone, to salute someone with a holy kiss, Romans 16:16, in whatever way we saw fit to do so. That's acceptable. Oh, the losses that we have faced in the past 10 months and now into this year of January 2021. But I want you to know that all those losses equal grief. That's what that grief is, an individual experience, generally a painful feeling of sadness that usually follows an actual loss, or it precedes an anticipated loss. And so for the past months, we've dealt with loss after loss after loss. And likely we wondered, when's it ever going to end? And then we had to deal with more losses. That's the way grief works from time to time. There are many Bible characters that we could talk about that dealt with losses. I guess the first one that comes to mind would be Job. Job lost everything significant and important to him, his wealth, his slaves, his servants, his livestock, and then he lost, of course, his 10 children. And then on top of that, he dealt with the reality of his own health. To the point that when his 3 friends came to see him, Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz, Job chapter 2, 13 through 15, they didn't even recognize him. He was so different because of his pain, because of his suffering. And yet Job tried to understand, why is all this happening to me? And that was a good question for him, and that's probably a good question for you. Sometimes you'll find the answers, and other times you may not find the answers to that question, and that's okay. Let's talk about grief for a few moments before we conclude. Grief is normal and healthy when we deal with some kind of loss in our life. It's not abnormal to grieve. As I already said, 100% of us grieve in one way or the other. So when you grieve, when you mourn, when you're sad, when you're sorrowful, no, it's okay. It's healthy. It's a natural consequence to what you've experienced. Know also that grief's going to affect you in several different ways. It's going to affect you emotionally. Job cried, he got mad, he was frustrated, he was worried, he was concerned. All these different emotions from the same grief that he experienced. Grief affects us physically. We don't feel well. We're sick. We don't want to get out of bed. Maybe we can't sleep at all. Maybe we solve our grieving by eating. Maybe we do just the opposite. We don't want to eat anything. It affects us physically. It affects us mentally. It bothers us. It worries us. And we know that worry is wrong, but yet we still do that from time to time. We're frustrated about the feelings. We're wondering where all this is coming from. We're wondering, why is this happening to me? And then, yes, grief can also affect us spiritually speaking. It makes us wonder where God is. It makes us wonder where we are with God. And more than ever before, we need church members, loving, genuine, faithful church members that will see us through, that will walk with us as we deal with grief in our own individual way. Realize that grief, even though it's universal, also means that it's an individual matter. You're not going to be exactly like anyone else around you in regard to your grief, because you are different than them. And your relationship to that loss is different than their relationship to any kind of loss. Even within the same family unit, people grieve as individuals, not collectively as a family. Know that grief is a multifaceted emotion. And what I mean by that is there's not a go-to stage by stage progression that you can find, because grief doesn't work that way. Each one of us in our own unique way are going to deal with grief as an individual, and therefore our experiences will be different from others. We gave a few moments ago examples of how we can all grieve differently from different kinds of losses. Yes, tragically, we've all dealt with the reality of the loss of life, and there's nothing that can take that pain away for a period of time. We mourn their loss, whether it be due to the pandemic or other kinds of situations. But you know, there are other kinds of losses of life that are just as devastating and cause great pain. Loss of relationships, loss of being able to worship God as we like to do so, as we used to do so together. Loss of family units, loss of jobs, loss of health, loss of income that many had to deal with during the pandemic. Loss of a belief system, loss of someone that you know and love that's no longer loving the Lord as they ought to do so. Those are all kinds of losses, and they produce pain and grief just like the loss of life. Remember, as you deal with your grief, that the closer you are to that relationship, the greater the potential of the loss. Let me just give an example. If I were worshiping with you at your church this coming Sunday and the announcements were made and someone was mentioned as being sick and needing prayer, I would try in my mind to remember that individual in a personal, private prayer of mine later that day. Now, that's probably all I would do, simply because I don't have a relationship with that individual. But if you mention someone from my congregation, where I have worshiped for now 23 plus years, or if you mention some family member of mine of which I have a great relationship with, I would grieve. And I would be very much involved in that kind of situation, because the closer I am to the relationship, the greater the potential the loss feelings can be. So just recognize that. And as you look at your grief losses and you're wondering, why am I floundering? Why am I having so many problems? Why am I suffering all these things? Just realize the closer you are to the relationship, the greater the potential the loss and the grief can be. Know this: as long as a person is grieving normally, they can and will grieve perhaps for as long as they live. And that's okay. And we want to be sure that we grieve normally. We don't do anything, we don't want to say or do anything that would produce feelings of self-harm or harm for other individuals. But our goal is not to get over someone's relationship that we had with them. Our goal is to get beyond that. And we can and will perhaps remember that individual as long as we live, as we continue to return back to life and do all that we can possibly do. Grief. It's a universal emotion. But know that in doing that, we are not alone. Others around you understand your grief, or at least they want to try. Church members that care, truly care and concern, let them help you. Tell them what you need from them. Prayer to God. 1 Peter 5, verse 7, casting all your care on him, God, for he cares for you. In the text, that's present tense. That means that God continues to pray and care for us today, not just yesterday, and he'll do so tomorrow as well. And know this: as you grieve and you find others that can help you in your grief, as you pray to God, remember this: Jesus Christ is always there for you. 7 centuries before the time that Jesus came into the world in the form of a babe, Isaiah would say of him in Isaiah 53, verse 3 and 4, he is a man of sorrows and he's acquainted with grief. And whoever you are that's listening and watching today, know this: he's not only acquainted with his own grief, but he also is acquainted with your grief. He's always just a prayer away. May God help you as you deal with grief to remember these things that we've talked about. Can we close with prayer? Loving Father, thank you for the day. Whoever it is that's listening, bless them with care and concern from others, compassion from you, and knowing that Jesus Christ cares for every situation that they're facing. Thank you to God for what Jesus gives us in this life and the hope that he gives us beyond this life. In his blessed name we pray. Amen. It's been a blessing to be with you today, and I hope and pray that you found these words to be useful and helpful to you as you grieve in this world. God bless you. Stay close to him. Love him and serve him.